in terms of let's put the lens back on India, because I think it is a very good lens that you put out there, and obviously it's personal to you, but I still think it's a good as such a powerful nation. You've also said they can't ban Bitcoin. I think you've got kind of like a wider view on this. We know like Bitcoin is essentially banned in China, but people still use it. I went out to Bolivia last year, well, a year before last, before the ban. Bitcoin's banned there. But I still met up with Bitcoiners and we hung out. It's like, so you can't ban Bitcoin. So what is it? I mean, it just creates a premium on the price.
Yeah. So the thing is, look, India did something called demonetization in late 2016, where they took a bunch of 100 and 500 rupee notes, and they just said these are all worth nothing in so many weeks, and you have to come in and exchange them for new notes. And the idea was that for years, so-called black money had been hoarded by bad actors, and this was a way of forcing them all out into the open and making them all exchange their money for new money, right? And then those that didn't have a way to show that that money had been earned legitimately, poof, vanished in a cloud of dust, right? Now, there's a lot of arguments over, whether this policy was good or bad or what have you. It did a few things. First, it caused, humongous lines for people to go and exchange their currency. And number two is it did accelerate the transition towards fintech and online payments in India, because people, it was kind of a shock to the system like COVID that did actually shift them into this quote cashless economy. And so UPI adoption has just gone whoosh, vertical over the last 4 years. So there was some, it wasn't just disruption, there was also something that was built there to accommodate the inflow. Okay. Now with respect to these countries that quote ban crypto, clearly they haven't had an impact on the crypto price, right? What they do is they push it to OTC, they push it underground, they push it overseas. It's something where there's still millions of Chinese users. They just have to do things like, like get a VPN and buy it overseas, or they have to do it through legal channels, like, you have an overseas vehicle that buys Tesla or MSTR stock now, or invest in a fund that has exposure to crypto, or you actually travel overseas and found a company in a jurisdiction which is, the issue is the upside is so large that it's not like a small thing. For this is actually a life-changing thing. So that's why you do have people circumventing it in ways legal and illegal, people flouting it. And that actually, over the long time, breeds disrespect for the law, And so essentially, there's, as I mentioned in this post, the follow-up post, how India legalizes crypto, there's essentially three ways in which you can't really ban crypto, right? The first is technically, it's not like demonetization. You can't just set the price to zero. You can't seize all the private keys. You can't seize all the private keys because you'd have to de-gauss every device. You'd have to find every laptop, erase every tech. Finding 12 words on a billion laptops, that's not that easy, right? There could be pieces of paper. Yeah. So it's something which you really just can't delete it, and you can't. I mean, people can speak 12 words. I mean, not just 12 words, but the digital signature, or they could broadcast a transaction in theory over the phone by just reading out bytes, and someone could do it somewhere else, right? I'm not saying these won't inhibit it, but you have to really lock down the country pretty aggressively, very aggressively, stopping emigration and immigration, stopping any form of communication, stopping satellites, basically grinding the economy to a halt to find these needle in a haystacks of crypto transactions, let alone holders. So technically they can't ban it. Socially, they can't ban it because there's now 100 million crypto users, and they're disproportionately enriched among, tech people, finance people, early adopters. You're seeing a lot of celebrities, athletes, entertainers, and it's just hard to demonize because it's not a person, right? Satoshi did this amazing thing where he just vanished. And so, all the normal character attacks, character assassinations, all the stuff they're set up to do, it might as well be COVID, Like the thing about COVID, I mentioned this a while ago, is like all the normal weapons the US uses, they can't bomb COVID, they can't regulate it, they can't freeze its accounts, they can't demonize it in the press, It's just something where all the normal tools that the US uses on something, this is immune to that. And Bitcoin is actually similar, right? Bitcoin itself, right? Not all the people who hold it, you can attack them, but Bitcoin itself, the protocol can't be hit by those measures. It can be retarded in some ways, but but it's just too strong, I think, at this point. We'll see, though. We'll see. There's it is possible. I mentioned the firewall attack. Did I mention the firewall attack?
Nope.
Yes, no? So, people talk about a mining attack on crypto. I think more like a mining attack is straightforward. It's kind of like seeing a big bodybuilder and going up to him and just punching him, right? That's like the thing he's prepared for. Maybe you can do it if you're also a bodybuilder, but it's like the obvious attack, right? So mining seems like it wouldn't be a smart attack. The alternative would be the Chinese basically use a great firewall to just try to block Bitcoin related packets, and this is like, we don't know how good they'd be at that if they really tried. Okay. But if you did the predator prey, step one, the Chinese block, or the state really, I should say, CCP blocks port 8333. Okay. Then the Bitcoin developers do port randomization. Then the Chinese do deep packet inspection to figure out, okay, like, or they just look at the source code and they just look at all the ports that they're choosing. Okay. So then the Bitcoin developers do tunneling. They send Bitcoin traffic over something else like SSH. Then the Chinese try to do deep packet inspection or some kind of AI packet sniffing on all packets to figure out which ones of those are crypto related. And there'll probably be certain patterns of those that look like that. And they'll try to interrupt those, right? And then impose penalties on the people for running them. And that's like a cat and mouse back and forth where it's not obvious to me. I'd have to really study like the state of the art of networking, right, to figure out what happens there. But in the worst case scenario, what happens is you have a peekaboo problem where the transactions are happening in the rest of the world, but mining is still disproportionately in China. So the chain gets extended in China, but it can't synchronize quickly enough with the rest of the world because there's these weird patchy firewall issues. Like one of the things that Bitcoin protocol assumes is a global internet, right? That nodes can reach other nodes. That is an assumption, right? And if you have significant partitions, especially persistent partitions in the network, where some nodes cannot synchronize with other nodes, especially mining nodes cannot synchronize with other mining nodes quickly enough, right? If that is the case, due to nation states and the firewall and so on, you need something which is a partition tolerant consensus algorithm that can tolerate large durations of time where some of the network cannot see the other network. Because what would happen right now is you'd have like two chain extensions, one in China and one in the rest of the world. One in the rest of the world would have transactions, one in China would not. They'd only have the Chinese transactions. And whenever they synchronized up, you'd have a chain reorg where all the blocks from the rest of the world were thrown away and the Chinese chain was number one, right? Now, you might be able to tolerate this by just radically increasing the number of blocks that you required from 6 to like 50 or 100, right? Or whatever the period would be for the chain synchronization to happen, because that might be one way you work around it. And what that does is it means that finality for Bitcoin transactions goes up from an average of 6 blocks to 60 blocks or 600 or whatever it is for them to finally synchronize up, right? So that's a hackish way to deal with it. It's better than nothing. It's not great, right? And so that's like the firewall-based attack on it, which I think is the most likely technical attack from the Chinese side. On the U.S. side, I don't think the U.S. is competent enough to do anything technically. It can't send checks to people in the mail. So like the U.S. government, like people have this vision from Marvel superhero movies and like all these Hollywood movies that the U.S. government is like got all these superpowers and stuff. And that was like the 1950s U.S. government, which could do the Manhattan Project, or 1968 that could do Apollo. And even 1980s, the U.S. could do some things, right? But it is in such sharp decline that it couldn't even stand up healthcare.gov in 2012, and that was 9 years ago, right? So you're seeing it with the power outages, you're seeing it with the failure of public health and public schools and fire and police and local, state, and federal governments versus Corona. You're seeing it with all of this other stuff. So the U.S. government is unable, in my view, to launch a technical attack on it. But what it can do is it can try to launch a regulatory attack. Where it's just going and harassing people who are holders of it or exchanges or things like that, right? And that does have its, that like, we'll see what happens, right? Like some of those kinds of acts, like this Very Stable Genius Act has been proposed, right? But there's a lot of also protest against that, right? If you saw the number of comments that are put on the kind of midnight bill that was put out right before, like Mnuchin left office, they're fairly harsh comments, thousands of them, So I think there will be pushback within the West on the regulatory attack. And I think that it's TBD as to what will happen with the Chinese on the technical attack. The only reason I say this is I'm pretty sure cryptocurrency will win. I think Bitcoin will win. Even if the current Bitcoin protocol doesn't win, the Bitcoin ledger will win because it can be backed up and put onto, it's like it can be rejuvenated and brought onto different bodies, right? So anyway, let me pause there, get your thoughts, because a little bit of a digression.